In a world where power often speaks louder than principle, one man chose truth as his weapon. Dr. S. Jaishankar, India's sharpest diplomat, didn't raise his voice. He simply spoke, and the room fell silent. These weren't just words. They were echoes of centuries, the calm defiance of a nation that no longer bows. In boardrooms of the West, where questions are loaded and narratives are shaped, he answered, not to impress, but to remind them that the world has changed. This is not just a speech. This is a moment, a reckoning. These are the words that silence the West. And once you hear them, you'll understand why. Let me know if you want a cinematic version with background scene suggestions too. Asserted India's independent foreign policy stance. Challenged Western double standards on global conflicts. Defended India's strategic partnerships without apology. Emphasized multipolarity and respect for sovereignty. Highlighted India's rising global influence and confidence. In his speech, Dr. S. Jaishankar firmly asserted India's independent foreign policy stance, signaling a clear departure from any expectations that New Delhi would align blindly with Western interests. With measured words and unwavering confidence, he reminded the world that India is not a follower. It is a sovereign voice with its own national interests, principles, and worldview. He spoke not with aggression, but with clarity, making it known that India will not be pressured into taking sides in global power struggles that do not serve its people. He made it clear that India's decisions on international matters are guided by strategic autonomy and rooted in pragmatism rather than ideology. Whether it is the country's relationship with Russia, its balancing act in the Indo-Pacific, or its stand on multilateral forums, Jaishankar emphasized that India will act in accordance with its own evaluation of circumstances, not in accordance with what other nations expect or demand. He dismissed attempts to question or coerce India's positions on geopolitical crises, suggesting that such pressure reveals more about the insecurities of others than the values of India. This assertion was not just about policy, it was about identity. For far too long, developing nations were expected to echo the voice of the West. Jaishankar's message was a bold refusal to play that role. It was a declaration that India has matured into a nation that can think, decide, and act on its own terms. He wasn't asking for approval. He was declaring independence in thought and action. And in doing so, he reminded the global audience that the age of unilateral influence is ending. India, with its own civilizational strength and democratic maturity, will no longer be lectured. It will engage, but only as an equal. Dr. S. Jaishankar's speech struck a powerful chord when he challenged the glaring double standards often exhibited by the West in handling global conflicts. With quiet precision, he exposed the selective outrage and moral inconsistency that have come to define much of international diplomacy. He questioned why some invasions are condemned while others are conveniently overlooked, why certain human rights issues dominate headlines while others are ignored, and why some nations are allowed to act with impunity while others are constantly scrutinized or sanctioned. He didn't name countries outright, but the message was unmistakable. The world has watched how powerful nations bend rules to suit their interests and label it as the rules-based order. Jaishankar calmly reminded us that these rules were not universally agreed upon. They were often written and enforced by those in power to serve their own agendas. He posed the uncomfortable question, who decides what is right and what is wrong on the global stage? And more importantly, why should one part of the world get to define morality for everyone else? Jaishankar's words resonated because they spoke not only for India, but for many nations that have long felt the weight of hypocrisy. He made it clear that countries like India are no longer willing to stay silent or be lectured by those who fail to uphold their own standards. The days of one-sided narratives are over. What the West sees as neutrality, others see as balance. What the West calls non-alignment, India calls independent judgment. This wasn't just a criticism. It was a call for fairness, for equal treatment, and for a world order that recognizes the dignity and agency of every nation, not just the privileged few. Through his calm defiance, Jaishankar flipped the script, and the silence in the room spoke volumes. Dr. S. Jaishankar made it unmistakably clear that India will not apologize for its strategic partnerships. In an era of shifting alliances and multipolar power centers, he reinforced India's right to choose its partners based on its national interests, not out of obligation, caution, or ideological alignment. Whether it is purchasing energy from Russia, deepening defense cooperation with the United States, or expanding ties with Middle Eastern powers, India's decisions are calculated, deliberate, and unapologetic. He dismissed the notion that relationships with certain countries must automatically imply hostility toward others. India, he explained, is not boxed into binaries. It does not view the world in black and white, nor does it subscribe to the idea that partnerships should come at the expense of independence. Jaishankar stressed that India's global engagements are guided by a long-term vision that places sovereignty, self-interest, and strategic foresight above global peer pressure. His words were not defensive. They were assertive, as though reclaiming a voice that had for too long been expected to justify itself to the West. He also subtly criticized the tendency of Western powers to judge India's partnerships through their own geopolitical lens, as if India's choices required validation from external actors. India's collaboration with Russia, for instance, was framed not as defiance, but as a legacy of trust and mutual benefit. Similarly, India's cooperation with the West was acknowledged, but without submission or dependency. He affirmed that India engages globally not to please, but to prosper. In saying this, Jaishankar positioned India as a confident power capable of navigating complexity without losing clarity. It was a message to the world: India will engage with everyone on its own terms. Strategic autonomy is not isolation, it's maturity. And India, he implied, has come of age in the global arena. Dr. S. Jaishankar emphasized that the world is no longer unipolar and that the age of domination by a single power or bloc is over. He underlined the importance of multipolarity, where multiple nations hold influence and contribute to shaping global outcomes. In this evolving world order, he insisted that sovereignty must be the cornerstone of international relations. No nation, regardless of its size or power, should dictate terms to another. Every country has the right to pursue its interests, chart its own course, and protect its national dignity without interference. Jaishankar's remarks highlighted a growing sentiment among emerging powers that true global stability can only come through mutual respect and balance, not control. He challenged the idea that power alone grants moral authority, if pointing out that the selective enforcement of international norms erodes trust. For multipolarity to be meaningful, it must be built on fairness, reciprocity, and a shared commitment to coexistence rather than domination. He explained that India does not seek to replace one hegemon with another. Instead, India envisions a world where influence is dispersed, dialogue is open, and every voice is valued. In such a world, Asia, Africa, Latin America, and other historically marginalized regions are not merely spectators, but active participants in decision-making. Sovereignty to India is not just a principle, it is non-negotiable. His calm yet firm delivery made one thing clear: India will not be part of any camp that undermines the independence of others. Jaishankar's word, the sentiment of a confident and determined to uphold a world order that reflects equality, not hierarchy. Multipolarity with respect for sovereignty isn't just an idea. It is India's diplomatic doctrine. And through that lens, he challenged the world to evolve with it, or risk becoming irrelevant. Dr. S. Jaishankar highlighted India's rising global influence with calm precision, making it clear that the world must now recognize a new voice that cannot be ignored. No longer defined by its post-colonial past or economic limitations, India today stands as a confident, capable, and credible power on the global stage. Jaishankar didn't boast. He simply pointed to reality. India is now the world's most populous nation, one of its largest economies, a leader in digital innovation, space exploration, and a reliable partner in both regional and global crises. He spoke of India not as an emerging power, but as a matured one, rooted in its civilizational depth and democratic strength. Whether it's through vaccine diplomacy, climate leadership, or technology-driven development, India is setting its own example, and it's doing so without imitating the West or conforming to outdated power structures. The message was clear: India's rise is not a threat, but a correction in global balance. Jaishankar also emphasized that India's influence isn't just economic or strategic. It's intellectual and moral. He underlined how India's positions on complex global issues are now shaping conversations, not merely reacting to them. On Ukraine, the Middle East, or global trade, India is a voice of reason and balance, refusing to be pulled into ideological camps. That posture, rooted in principle and independence, has earned India both respect and criticism, but more importantly, attention. What stood out in his words was a quiet confidence, a belief that India's time is not coming, it's already here. Jaishankar wasn't asking the world to approve of India's rise. He was informing them. The silence that followed wasn't just agreement. It was recognition. India is no longer waiting to be invited to the table. It's already sitting there and increasingly helping decide the shape of the table itself. As Dr. S. Jaishankar concluded his speech, he left the room not with raised volume, but with elevated clarity. He didn't seek applause. He commanded reflection. His words were not crafted to provoke, but to awaken. In every line, he reminded the global audience that India is not a nation to be managed, pressured, or swayed. It is a sovereign voice with its own compass, and its own destiny. He closed not by asking the world to change for India, but by declaring that India will no longer bend to fit within the narratives written elsewhere. It will lead, it will question, it will decide on its own terms. Through calm defiance and precise truth, Jaishankar laid bare the contradictions of global politics, exposed the double standards long ignored, and illuminated a path of independent diplomacy rooted in dignity, not submission. This was not merely a diplomatic address. It was a turning point. A reminder that India is not the rising voice of tomorrow. It is the steady, unapologetic voice of today. And that voice just silenced the room.